Hi, I'm Andy Jones, Content Editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint. Today, in our studio lesson, we're going to paint a lighthouse. This is a simple landscape, and we're going to learn some techniques for a beautiful sky, some water, and how to paint some weather-aged architecture. So, come on, let's paint. All right, for today's lighthouse lesson, I chose to use a burlap canvas. When I was shopping in the craft store, I had the option to buy a regular white artist stretched canvas, and I saw this and I thought, well, this tan background might be interesting. So I decided to use it, and it adds a little bit of atmosphere to the overall painting. When you open up a burlap canvas, you'll often feel that it's not very taut. So I applied 2 coats of water-based varnish and then gave it a thorough sanding. And that makes it much more taut, and it also smooths out the rough texture of the burlap. For our sky and water, we're going to rely on FolkArt's Blending Gel medium to give us all the time we need to work on this. So I'm going to put a nice squirt of that out on my palette. And for my sky and water, we're going to be using regular formula FolkArt acrylic paint. I'm going to use titanium white, ultramarine blue, and some burnt umber. You can choose to make your sky as light or as dark as you want to. I'm going to take some of my titanium white aside because I'm going to need some later on. But take a nice amount because you don't want to mix a color and then run out. Always remember to wipe your palette knife off on your paper towel when you've finished getting some paint so that you don't contaminate another puddle of paint. And I'm going to pick up some ultramarine blue. That looks like about a nice amount. To mix it in to really see, and make sure that when you mix your paint that you're always pushing the paint into the puddle and then mashing it and moving it around. You will never mix your paint up if you try to stir it. That's why you need a nice metal blade palette knife to mix your paint. Don't try to do it with a popsicle stick or a plastic knife from your to-go food. Invest in a good palette knife and it will last you for years and years and years. So again, notice that I clean the back of the palette knife off, pushing the paint up into a puddle, and then clean the top of the knife off. Now I'm going to wipe my palette knife again on the paper towel to clean it off, and I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to tone down this blue because I want this painting overall it's kind of a moody painting. It's not a bright summer day. It's kind of a calm before the storm kind of painting. So we're going to make a moody blue, if you will. Those of you who are old enough to know will get that joke. Other people won't. That's okay. You can Google it. So that seems still to be a little bit light to me. So I'm just going to take this and divide this puddle of paint into 2 sections. And I'm going to darken up the other pile by adding more ultramarine blue and thoroughly mix that in. Always pushing the paint back together, mashing to thoroughly mix it. Clean my palette knife off on my paper towel, and I'm going to add some more burnt umber. Again, we're making a kind of stormy sky, so we don't want our colors to be too bright. And every time you paint this painting, you will mix a different shades of blue, and the sky will always look a little bit different. All right, so I'm pretty happy with those 2 colors. So I'm going to clean my palette knife again so that it's ready for my next use. And I'm going to pick up a large flat brush, and I'm going to dip into my FolkArt Blending Gel medium, and I'm going to begin to apply this to the burlap canvas. And the only thing that I've transferred onto my canvas at this point is my horizon line. And so I'm going to neatly and carefully go right down next to the horizon line, because I want to make sure that my canvas is covered with a nice thin even coat of blending gel, so that my drying time is greatly extended, so that I can blend the colors in my sky without having to worry about my paint drying on me. If you're an experienced painter and you're feeling brave, you can forego this step and just paint as fast as you can so that you can blend your sky. I prefer to have the extra insurance of the blending gel so that I can take my time and not have to worry about my paint drying on me before I get it blended. So just brushing this on, making sure that the whole sky is covered with this nice thin even coat of blending gel. You don't want any spots that are dry. Okay, now I'm going to set my brush down, and I'm just going to take a small piece of my paper towel, and I'm just going to gently wipe over the surface. That's going to remove any excess blending gel and make sure that I have just a sparse, even coat on the canvas. Now I'm going to pick up a large flat brush, and I'm going to pick up my dark blue color, and I'm just going to begin to brush that across the top of the canvas. And make sure to put enough on there that you cover the canvas, because your blending gel is going to make this a little bit more transparent, as you can see in these little areas. It's one reason why we blotted some of the excess off with our paper towel. All right, I'm going to wipe the brush off, but not put it in water. Then I'm going to pick up my lighter blue color, and I'm going to apply that to my canvas. And notice that I don't have one straight line across. It's got some changes to it. And then bring this color right down to the horizon line. Paint neatly and carefully, because you want to try to make sure that your horizon line is nice and straight. Nice and careful right along there. Okay, now I'm going to wipe the excess paint off of my brush, folding my paper towel over the brush, pressing and pulling the paintbrush out so that I've groomed the brush back into a nice flat shape. And I'm just going to start right along the horizon line, and I'm going to blend with long light strokes all the way across the canvas, and then move this light color up, blending it into my darker blue. And because I have plenty of blending gel on the canvas, I have plenty of time to blend and soften this, and I'm just moving back down again. Long light strokes, paying attention that I get a nice gradation of color. Now, if you want more of the tan showing through, I think you can see some of it over here. There's a little bit more of it showing over there, which looks really good to me. So I'm not going to add any more of my blues to the canvas, but I am going to take my flat brush and pick up some titanium white on it. I want to make sure that I get that put into the bristles of the brush. Say that again for you. I'm going to pick up some titanium white, and I want to make sure to work that thoroughly into the bristles of the brush. And then I'm just going to add, because I've got my lighthouses going in over here, and over here I just want to add some interest. So I'm just going to scrub a little bit of this white on, kind of making a nice little cloud shape. Not worried about exactly how it looks now, it's just some lighter area over there. I'm going to wipe my brush on my paper towel, take the excess color off the brush, and then once again I'm just going to come with long light strokes, just softening over the canvas, and you'll see that this is going to soften that white in, and now I've just got the slightest little whisper of a cloud formation there. And I think that's all I'm going to do with the sky. And I'm going to move down to the bottom portion of the canvas, and we're going to paint the water. This is going to be pretty easy for you because it's just like the sky, except we're going to add some waves to it. So using my flat brush, I'm going to once again apply blending gel to the canvas. And I want to make sure I paint right up to the horizon line. And you can move your canvas around if you need to so that it's comfortable for you to work on it. Again, the gel is going to add the insurance that we need, that we have all the time to work on the water that we need to. Nice, thin, even coat. And I'm going back to the same brush that I used on the sky. I'm going to pick up the darker blue color, and I'm going to carefully paint that right next to the horizon line. Work neatly and carefully. So far there's nothing difficult about what we're doing. I think you all can do this pretty easily. Remember, if you do this and you're unhappy with it, you can either take a wet rag and wash this off, or you can let it dry and paint right over it and just consider this an undercoat. So again, stroking the blue on all the way across. Then I'm going to wipe my brush, pick up some of the lighter blue, begin to brush that on, and then blend. I've got a lot of stuff going on in the corner, so I'm not really worried about how much coverage I get over there, but we will just blend back and forth using a light touch. Then I'm going to add some little ripply waves. I'm going to wipe the excess paint off of my big flat brush. I'm going to load the brush with some titanium white and work that in. And we're going to stand our brush up on the chisel edge, and we're going to move parallel to the horizon line, and we're going to touch our brush down, and where we want the wave a little bit bigger, we're going to add a little more pressure, and then soften the end. Get another little wave, maybe another one there. Don't want to add too much wave action because it's getting right up into our little cove. So we've done our sky, now we've done our water, and we need to let this completely dry before we transfer our design onto our canvas. So this is a good time to pause the video and either paint your sky in water or catch up to where I am and then start your video again. Okay, as you can see, I have transferred the line drawing onto my canvas. This is the one that you'll find in your Let's Paint kit, and I transferred it with white transfer paper, and then I came back and added some reinforcement with some pencil where I really couldn't see my design. So anytime you're transferring a design onto your surface and you can't see it either with your gray transfer paper or your white transfer paper, come back with either a white chalk pencil or a regular graphite pencil and just clean up anything that you can't see, because it's very hard to paint what you can't see. All right, I want to add, now that I know exactly where my land is, my little kind of cliffs here, I'm going to pick up a little bit of blending gel medium on my brush, and I'm just going to kind of dampen the little shallow harbor there. That's right underneath the little rock jetty and the little dunes here. Just adding some blending gel on there. Take the excess off my brush, and I'm going to side load my brush with my dark blue color. Make a little loading zone here on my palette. Then I'm going to add a little extra ultramarine blue and a little extra burnt umber to this because I want to make this really dark. And I'm going to pick up some more paint. Come back here, add a little bit more burnt umber. So now I've got a nice kind of dark, gloomy blue color. And I'm just going to start right next to the cliff area here and just kind of zigzag a little bit of this on and it's going to carry out right underneath the little rock jetty. So now I'm going to take my brush, and right where this kind of fades away into the foreground, I'm going to begin to blend vertically, just reaching up and pulling straight down and coming out. And now we've added a darker area to the water here in the harbor. And we're just going to leave that alone. We'll come back to it in a minute. And we're going to cover up most of that with some grasses anyway. So just wanted to make a little bit of a dark area, adding some more interest. Now I'm going to shift to a smaller flat brush, and I'm going to begin using titanium white to fill in the lighthouse and our little building. So I'm going to start up here and very neatly and carefully just undercoat the lighthouse. And I'm going to turn this around so that I can really see this other side over here. And then you're just going to have to kind of pat the color on, because you need to make sure to fill in the weave of the canvas. And this canvas is a little bit more textured. Even though I have put the varnish on it and sanded it, it's still a little bit more textured than your regular artist canvas, so keep that in mind. I'm going to just paint up this side of the lighthouse, making sure that I've got a nice smooth edge. Then I'm going to turn it so it's comfortable for me, and then I'm going to paint the little area right under this walkway. I know a lot of you travel around the country to see the different lighthouses, and this is no particular lighthouse in any particular area. It's kind of got all the little features that I think a lighthouse ought to have. It's got the little red roof on top of it. It's got the lantern. It's got a little kind of observation deck. This particular one has 3 spiraling stripes on it, which is always a pretty thing to see on a lighthouse. If you've got a particular lighthouse where you live, you might want to put the black stripes on it. Some of them are rings that run around a lighthouse. Just, you can do whatever you want to do to personalize your own painting. This is just what I happen to think a pretty lighthouse looks like. And because this is something that's it's a building, and so we have to pay attention to things. We can't have the sides, swooping in. It's got to look like it could stand up by itself. So pay attention to your line drawing, transfer it carefully to your surface, and then work that you don't have things kind of whacked out, or somebody will point that out to you instantly. And again, I'm just making sure that I fill in the weave of the canvas. And the weave of the canvas is going to play an important part of how we actually finish up this lighthouse. I've got some tricks coming your way. So again, work neatly and carefully. You're not in any kind of race. If your white isn't completely covering, don't worry. You can let it dry, and we can apply a second coat. We want to make sure that we have a beautiful opaque white lighthouse, and we'll do all of that before we move on. Still using the titanium white, I'm going to fill in the base of the lighthouse. Again, pat the paint on so that you fill in the weave of the canvas. And always remember to turn your canvas so that it's comfortable for you to paint. Never paint in some awkward position, because you'll end up not having a good time. And I always want you to have fun when you paint, because that's what it's really all about, is the personal enjoyment you get while you're actually painting. I'm sure that somebody could tell you that it will think release endorphins or some brain chemical that's supposed to make you feel good. And you lose track of time while you're doing this because you can't think of anything else but what's right at the end of your paintbrush. All right, so I'm painting the outbuilding white, going up underneath the roof, making sure that my edges are vertical to the side of my canvas, and then just filling in the building, making sure to fill in the weave of the canvas. And then this is just going to fade off to the edge, and that'll be covered up with our frame there. Okay, I'm going to get a couple of other colors out on my palette, and then we'll begin to work on the grassy area there and our little cliffs. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of FolkArt Pure Black to my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of sap green. Okay. Going to rinse out my flat brush just a little bit. Don't need to get it completely clean, but I'm going to pick up some of my dark blue that I used in the sky and in the water. I'm going to add some more ultramarine blue, some more burnt umber. This is coming close to what we had shaded our water with there in the little harbor. And I'm going to add just a small amount of black to that to make it even darker. And I'm just going to double load my brush. Now it's got this kind of bluish black color in it, and I'm just going to sneak into my titanium white so that you see I get this kind of nice gradation from dark to light. I'm going to add a little more brown to this. And I'm just going to come here and where I need a little bit of water in my brush. Touch my brush to the water, blot on a paper towel, and come back to my loading zone. I want to just kind of stroke a little bit of this color onto the cliff. Add a little bit more water. So I want this to flow a little better for me. And then at this area here, I'm going to add some of this dark color. And the reason that I double loaded the brush is to get some action happening from dark over to light. I'm going to pick up some more light on my brush, come out here to the edge, and then just gently blend that back. Again, come out to where there's this little division there, stroke that on, and blend it back, and one more here at the front, and then just going to add some of this dark back here, and then soften that into the white, or the white back into the dark shading there. Okay. Now I'm going to take a little bit of pure black, a little brilliant ultramarine, and some titanium white. Want a little bit more black in that, and some white because I'm trying to make a nice grayish color. There we go. And I'm just going to start next to the cliffs there and underneath the base of the lighthouse, and I'm just gonna kind of dab this on. This is going to create the rock jetty. I mean, so far we're not using any difficult technique. I think you can all handle this. If you think I'm doing something that's really difficult, you can always pause the video, take a few minutes, give it a little bit of a practice run and see how things go. If they go well, good for you. If they don't go so well, You can always pause and give it another try until you get it looking just the way you want it to look. All right, so I'm picking up some white now, and I'm going to begin to kind of dab some of this white on. I'm mainly using the corner of my brush just to kind of push some of that light color on. You'll see what's going to happen with this a little bit later in the video, that we're not done with this. I'll always let you know when we're finished with an area, like I did when we were finished with the sky and the water. This is not the end of this, just adding some lightness here and there. And we'll play with this a little bit more. Okay, so we have that area done. Now we're going to fill in this little area of ground. So I'm going to take some burnt umber and some sap green. We're going to mix that together. And we're going to just want to make sure to add enough green to the burnt umber so that it has a green cast to it. It's not just all brown. And we're going to come, and we're going to use that official term. We're going to scrub. Just going to kind of scrub this color on right along there. And then I'm just going to add a little blending gel, which is going to make this a little slicker and a little bit lighter. And I'm actually just going to push this color right down to the top of the little cliffs. And this is not hard stuff we're doing. Okay, so now we've got a soft little edge there, and we've got this ground established. I'm also, with the same green and brown and a little bit of blending gel, which will actually make the paint a little bit more transparent. I'm going to come right down here and just scrub a little bit of this green color on here. And then right over here, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to add even more blending gel so this is more transparent. And just adding a little anchor for some grass that we're going to add a little bit later on. I want to undercoat one more thing before we take a break. So I'm going to get out some burnt sienna. And I want to undercoat the roof of the house with my burnt sienna acrylic. And I'm going to start right here along the ridge line. And then fill in the outside edges using the chisel edge of my brush and turning the canvas as I need to so that it's comfortable for me to paint. I hope you'll do the same thing, because I always want you to be comfortable when you're painting. And then we're just going to fill this in. Again, turning the canvas as you need to. Work neatly and carefully. And turning your canvas as you need to. Sorry, that's a lot of moving the canvas around, but got to be comfortable when you're painting. I'm also going to paint the very top of the lighthouse. And I fill in the two edges. And then right along this little curved area. Then we'll fill that in. Okay, now I'm going to wipe my brush and I'm going to pick up some burnt umber. And I'm just going to paint the underside of the eave over here. Okay, I think this is probably a really good time for us to pause. And if you're painting along with me, you might need to catch up, Or if you're working independently, let's get all of this done, the little jetty, the little cliffs here, the earth, get everything undercoated. While we're gone, I'm going to give my lighthouse and the little outhouse here a second coat of white so that we have a nice opaque coverage. And then when we come back, we'll start to add some architectural interest to our painting. All right, as you can see, I've made sure that I have a completely opaque white undercoat on my lighthouse, and I have transferred the stripes on the lighthouse, and we're ready to continue on. I want to start this segment by painting the lantern of the lighthouse. That's its technical term. And we're going to paint the glass by side loading a flat brush with titanium white. We're going to sneak into the edge of the white paint, bouncing our brush. Then we're going to move to a loading zone on the palette and blend the white color across the brush, creating a nice gradation of color. I want to make sure that I have a very strong white edge and then having it fade across the brush. And I'm going to move up to the lighthouse, and I'm going to start on the left-hand panel of glass and just gently stroke right down that line, blending that color across. I'm going to reload my brush with the white. If it seems like it's not moving on your palette, touch your brush to water, blot on your paper towel, and then come back to your loading zone. Again, nice strong white, and it fades across the brush. Then we'll move to the center pane of glass, and again, gently stroke that on. Load the brush again, and we'll come over to the last panel of glass over here, and we will stroke that on. And that's all there is to painting the glass on our lighthouse. I say that's all there is. We may come back and highlight it a little bit, but the idea is to have a nice crisp white edge and then have it fade across. Next panel is crisp white, and so on across the lighthouse. All right, now we're going to begin to shade the masonry part of our lighthouse. And we are going to do that with a flat brush that we've moistened in water, blotted on our paper towel, and we're going to load it on the side with burnt sienna. So I sneak into the paint, bouncing the brush, moving to a loading zone on my palette, keeping the burnt sienna toward the inside of the loading zone and letting the water be on the outside. I'm going to shade underneath what will be our walkway. Flip this around so I can pull the paint toward me. And I want to make sure that I don't have any holes in the shading. So if I have to, I can come back and work the other direction just to fill in those holes. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to dip my brush in water. I'm just going to shake off the excess so that my brush has an excess amount of moisture in it. And this is probably going to run away from me, and that's okay. But what I want to do is just touch the brush in a couple of places, and you can see how this burnt sienna kind of runs down the lighthouse. I can blot my brush and just pick up some of that excess, but this is creating a little bit of a running wash there, which is a nice way to get some interest in the masonry part of the lighthouse without having to work too hard. And then I'm going to, again, shade underneath the walkway. You can see I've got too many holes there, so I need to pick up some more paint and some more water, and we'll just, there we go, pat and apply that shading underneath the walkway. I'm going to move this and come back this direction so that I really make sure to fill in any little gaps in the weave of the canvas. And once again, I'm going to dip my brush in the water, have an excess amount of paint not an excess amount of paint, I'm sorry, an excess amount of water on the brush. And just going to dab that along, and I'm going to have to pick the canvas up, and my running wash is barely walking, so I'm going to pick up some more water, touch it to the canvas, and then you can see how I get this nice runny effect on the lighthouse. And we'll just let that run for just a minute. It's kind of catching there on my transfer lines. That's a really nice kind of effect that you get just by allowing a wash of color to run down on the canvas itself. So I'm going to now pick up a little bit of burnt umber on my brush. And I'm going to start at the bottom where the lighthouse meets the rock jetty. Dab this color on, stopping at the outbuilding. I'm going to blot the excess color off of my brush, and I'm just going to continue to pat and move this brown color up so that I'm creating some difference between the base of the lighthouse and the taller center portion of the lighthouse. Can add a little bit of black to my brush, add a little bit of black down there just for some extra interest here and there. You want to try to make your painting as interesting as you can with what I would consider the least amount of work possible. So again, going to pick up some burnt umber on my brush, find a clean spot on my palette so that I can blend and soften the color. And I'm going to shade underneath the roof of the little building here, making sure that I fill in the weave of the canvas. Those light spots are not attractive. Okay, then I'm just going to take my finger, go to blot that, softening that color a little bit, and then want to make sure that I've got a little extra shading there. Soften it as I need to. We're going to shade underneath the eaves of the building, again with the burnt umber. Just gently shade there, give a little color over here. Okay, so you see that we've created interest there without too much trouble or too much effort. And I'm going to add now some Naphtha Crimson to my palette. I want you to be careful and not use this full strength anywhere, or it'll be too bright and will kind of be jarring to your eye when you look at this painting, because everything up to this point has been toned down and soft in color. So I've got a thin puddle of Naphtha Crimson here that's just been thinned down with water. So I'm going to take this thin red, don't want a lot of the color on my brush, just a little bit, and we're going to come up to the very top of the lighthouse, and we're just going to brush a little bit of this thin red on. It's going to make that a little bit brighter up there, but it's not stop sign red. Do the same thing on the little roof of this building over here, starting at the bottom, just brushing some of this on. Again, it's a thin, soft color because we don't want this to be too bright. Now, we're going to paint the stripes of the lighthouse, and I imagine on this lighthouse when it was first built, the lighthouse was whitewashed, brilliant white, and these stripes were just as red as they could be. But I'm going to take some Naphtha Crimson and tone it down with a little burnt sienna, again, so the color isn't too bright and jarring. And I'm going to thin it down with some water. And we're going to paint the stripes on our lighthouse with this slightly dull red color that's been thinned down so that it's transparent. And we're just going to start at the edge of our lighthouse, and we're going to paint the stripe on. Moving it around as you need to. And if your stripes aren't perfect, that's okay. Just paint neatly and carefully. I think it's much easier to paint these stripes on a canvas painting than it would be to actually paint them on a lighthouse. Probably a lot safer for me too. And again, as I said, if you want to personalize this and paint the stripes or markings on the lighthouse to suit your lighthouse that's in your general vicinity, that's perfectly fine to do that. I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the red and burnt sienna on my brush, a little stronger color this time. I'm going to put a little bit of stronger color right at the edge of the lighthouse. Do that on both edges. Just going to help add to the roundness of our lighthouse by making it lighter in the center and slightly darker at the outside edges. All right, while that's drying, I'm going to pick up my number 2 liner brush, and I'm going to make a dark gray, so just a very small amount of white, some burnt umber, and some pure black. And I want the paint to be very, very thin. So I'm adding lots of water to it and bringing my brush to a point. And now we're going to paint the rocks of the jetty. And this is not difficult to do. You just have to have practiced with your liner brush so that you can paint a nice thin line. Make sure your paint is a nice fluid consistency. And I'm going to start here at the bottom of the jetty and neatly paint a jiggity line along there, and then I'm going to start outlining some rocks, and these rocks are just dark little lines, and I'm putting them kind of where I imagine my lights and shadows would have been from where I dabbed that additional white on. And it's just a suggestion of the rocks. I'm not going to come back and shade and highlight each one of these, but just painting the little crevices or indentations around what would be the rocks. And your jetty is finished just that quickly. Now, while I have my liner brush in my hand, I'm going to pick up some more white. And I'm going to get back into that brownish black color. Want a little bit more burnt umber. And with this chocolatey brownish gray color, I'm going to paint the supports for our walkways on the lighthouse. Paint them in very neatly and carefully. Just work slowly. Your paint has to be thin enough to flow off of your liner brush. If your paint's too thick, it's never going to come off the brush easily for you, and you'll be frustrated. I think having your paint too thick when you use your liner brush is probably the mistake that most people make when they begin to paint, because they think, oh, I'll just press on the brush harder. Well, that's not going to do it for you. You have to have the paint thin enough to flow off the brush. If it doesn't seem thin enough, simply add some more water and try again. When you're doing this, make sure that you fill in all of the pores of the canvas. I keep saying that, but it's very important that you don't leave pinholes in your paint. Got one more little area to paint. And again, work slowly and carefully. You're not in a race with anyone. Take your time. Now I'm going to shade again with my liner brush. Just picked up some more burnt umber. And And I'm going to put the shading right underneath this area here. And then I'm just going to use the tip of my brush and just kind of tickle this little bit of shading to soften it in. I can come up to the next area and I'm going to add the shading just at the outside edges and just gently pull that in. And again up here at the top, add some dark. I'm going to flip the canvas around and do the same thing from the other edge. Again, darkening at the outside and just tickling that and bringing it in. And then I'm going to come up here and do it one more time, just softening that a little tiny bit. Now, my stripes on my lighthouse are dry. I'm going to set my liner brush aside. I'm going to pick up my flat brush again. I'm going to dampen it, blot the excess off on my paper towel. I'm going to come in and side load with some burnt sienna. And I want to make sure to have this blended nicely across the brush. Make sure my brush is full of paint and the paint is suitably fluid. And we're going to shade the outside of the lighthouse now. And I'm going to come right down over the red stripes. So with the burnt sienna to the outside edge, just going to brush this right at the very edge and come over the stripes. And this is going to help make our lighthouse seem more round, and it's also going to make sure that those stripes really look like they're a part of the lighthouse. Okay, that looks pretty good to me, and I think we're at a good stopping point. If you need to catch up with where we're going, you can do that. Make sure that everything is dry, and when we come back, we're going to do some really interesting little techniques to get our railings and the highlights on our lighthouse. We have done a lot of work. We've got painted sky, ocean, lighthouse, stripes. You've done a lot of work, and now I'm going to show you how to cheat, because I need to put the railings on our lighthouse, and that's a lot of fine liner work, and many of you haven't practiced enough with your liner brush to be proficient with that. So I'm going to show you how I would cheat. And I am using a Micron permanent marker. You can buy these at your craft stores. They come in several different sizes. I am using a 0.05 nib. You can buy a 3-pack or a 10-pack of these, and they're a lot of fun to work with. And they're permanent black markers, so they're waterproof as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to just draw our railing on using this pen. And it's super easy to use, and it's quicker than your liner brush. You don't have to load it. You don't have to make sure your paint's thin. I'm gonna say it, you don't have to practice. It just works that easily. Now we're gonna put the next little set of railing on the same way. And you can use this pen anytime that you have any need for fine black line work. Some people even use these to sign their artwork, and that's perfectly fine. Again, just drawing on the railings. Come up here, I'm going to draw this little ball on the top of the lighthouse and just fill that in. Normally I would do that with a liner brush, and then our little lightning rod. I'm going to come down here to the roof of the little outbuilding, and just going to draw along the top ridge, and then some little dividing lines and some scratchy shading at the top. This can look like a standing seam roof if you want it to. Just some little scribbles here and there. If you want to, you could, outline things a little bit, but don't do too much of this work with a pen. It's black and it's a little bit harsh looking. All right, so we've got our railings on, and now we need to focus our attention on our lighthouse. And we're going to add the architectural interest with some sandpaper. I have a medium fine sandpaper and a coarse sandpaper, and we're going to see which one works the best. So I'm just going to fold this around my finger, and right in the center of the lighthouse, look, it's already starting to look like some stone work there. In Florida, they have a building material called coquina, which is crushed shells and concrete that was used on lots of buildings, and you can see it around the St. Augustine area. But that adds some interest there. We can do a little bit of sanding down here on the base of the lighthouse. Just get in there and just give it a little sanding. And this way, you're actually using the weave of the canvas to create interest for you. I did not need to use the heavy-duty grit on there, but I think that's pretty interesting looking. And now I'm going to take a dry flat brush and a very small amount of titanium white. Don't want much paint on the brush because we're just going to dry brush the slightest bit of highlight right here on the center of the lighthouse, and that's going to make the rounded portion come forward a little bit, because light areas advance and darker areas will recede. So just keep putting a little bit more on each time till I can see some of the white building up there, and that's just a really nice way to add a little bit of a highlight right in the center of our lighthouse. I'll set that brush aside, and now I'm going to pick up my liner brush again, and I'm going to make a nice dark green color with some sap green and burnt umber. And if you'll recall, that's what we added down here and on the bank. And I'm going to make this a very thin, flowing consistency, because I want the paint to come off of my liner brush very, very easily. I'm going to call your attention to the fact that there's a little bit of moisture here at the end of my ferrule. So I'm going to blot that off on my paper towel. That way, when I go to my canvas and I touch my brush to the surface, I don't have that little blob of water and paint falling off. All right, I'm going to begin to paint some long, fine grasses that you find along the seashore. I'm holding my brush pretty far back on the handle, using almost no pressure on the brush, and I'm going to begin to add lots of fine grasses. And this is where you can't fake it. You've either practiced enough so that you can make these fine lines, or you're going to have a lot of very thick, stiff grass. I hope that you will opt for the practice route, because it's important that you master basic brush fundamentals. And then we're adding this grass that's right in the foreground, and you want to make sure that some of the grass grows up and some of it crosses over, so that you have some variety on your canvas. It shouldn't all look the same. And then I'm going to come over here to this area, and we're going to paint some more grasses. This is the foundation grass. We're going to be adding more grass to this in a little bit. So just continue to add all these little marsh grasses. You want to make sure to add enough to really kind of fill in this foreground area. And if you've practiced and mastered the liner brush, that won't be very hard for you to do. It's important to get a good foundation on here, because we've got to come back and add some highlight grasses, and if we don't have a dark foundation on here, then our lighter grasses won't show up. All right, so for our lighter grasses, I'm going to take that same dark color that we had. I'm going to add some of our light sky and watercolor to that. And again, blotting my ferrule where the bristles and the ferrules meet to take care of that extra little bit of water. And I'm going to put a few of these on and see if this is light enough. And it doesn't seem light enough to me. So I'm going to pick up some titanium white and really lighten this up. And even though this color is going to be much, much lighter, all of the colors that we've been using on this painting today are very toned down or very muted colors. So our painting is a little, as I said earlier, it's a little moody, and I think that's kind of nice. So again, blot that ferrule and bristle connection. Make sure that we've got our brush fully loaded, and then come back. Oh, that's much better. So you can see some of these light, fine grasses going on. We'll come over here. And we're just adding really light, fine marsh grasses. I'm going to add even more white to this. We have some very, very, very light grass in the foreground. And I know some of you were thinking, oh my gosh, she makes that look so easy. It's easy for anybody who has control of their liner brush. Nothing magic about this. Very, very thin paint and almost no pressure at all on the liner brush. And I think that's enough grass in the foreground. Again, we've worked on our sky, added the little light area to indicate some cloud activity going on. We've got our soft waves there in our little harbor. Had some interest there with our little sandpaper technique, and finally filled in the foreground with lots of marsh grasses. We certainly learned a lot today painting this lighthouse. I showed you how we used a burlap canvas to add some interest to our sky and to set the mood. We also used a little bit of sandpaper to create some interesting texture on our lighthouse. It was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to invite you to join our Facebook group, Let's Paint with Plaid. You can become part of our online community with lots of other painters and get up-to-the-minute information about the Let's Paint program. And don't forget to visit our website, plaidonline.com/Let's Paint, where you'll find information about Skill Builder videos, studio lessons, Let's Paint Live, and FolkArt One Stroke with Donna Dewberry featuring Flowers of the Month.